A new era in the quest for speed. Germany was the first country to have jet-powered aircraft flying, but the creator of the jet engine was a young Royal Air Force officer, Frank Whittle. He patented the engine in 1930, but the British Air Ministry was slow to see the possibilities. He was kept starved of resources, and progress was painfully slow. His counterpart in Germany freely acknowledges Whittle's lead.
If the Air Ministry would not have denied support to Sir Frank, he could have brought to work a jet engine at least 4 years earlier. That would have been a deterrent for Hitler to go into Poland and risk a war with England and France.
In Britain, war had jolted the Air Ministry into action. The first flight of a British jet came in 1941, the experimental E-2839. By the summer of 1944, the first Gloster Meteor jet fighters were in squadron service. The Meteor was slower than the German aircraft, but in 1945, one of them set a new official speed record of 606 miles an hour. Whittle's engine was more powerful and more reliable than those in Germany, and there was great hope in the country for its future. But after the war, a new fight began.
We suddenly found ourselves competitive with our allies because the enemy had evaporated. And it became a race, quite frankly, between the Americans and ourselves to be the first to break the sound barrier, which was the big goal in those days. The sound barrier, of course, presented a tremendous challenge to both scientists and pilots. To scientists, it was something like akin to splitting the atom. To pilots, it was rather like climbing Mount Everest, because the goal was tremendously prestigious.
Frank Whittle had started on an engine to power a supersonic aircraft during the war. By injecting extra fuel directly into the jet pipe, he increased its power. It was developed in great secrecy for the experimental Miles M52. But once again, Whittle's hopes were dashed.
Everything was going well. The aeroplane was almost complete. The power plant was virtually complete. Then the ministry cancelled the project. And the reason they gave was that it was too dangerous to risk a pilot in a supersonic aeroplane. It burns me up to think of the way we gave away the lead in supersonic flight. I'm confident that had the M52 reached completion, we would have been the first to fly supersonically.
The British government now put its faith in a new high-speed research aircraft from the de Havilland Company, the DH-108, the Swallow. Its tailless, swept-wing design owed a lot to captured German aircraft. Its purpose was to explore flying at close to the speed of sound, where pilots fought for control against buffeting and turbulence. On a test flight over the Thames estuary, the DH-108 broke up in midair, killing Geoffrey de Havilland's eldest son. Meanwhile, America was ready with a radically new research aircraft. The Bell X-1 was rocket-powered, and its design was based on the shape of a heavy-caliber bullet. The pilot was Captain Charles Chuck Yeager.
And I remember Colonel Boyd, our boss at Flight Test, coming out here to Muroc and saying, hey, we're not going to hurt anybody. And he cited as an example of the DH-108 killing a couple of pilots. And so the British stopped all research and development in the high Mach region. And it hurt them badly even today. And consequently, he didn't want the U.S. Air Force to get into that position.
The rocket fuel only lasted a short time, so the X-1 was carried aloft in the bomb bay of a B-29.
No airplane had ever flown much above 90% of the speed of sound until we got the X-1 up there. And consequently, every flight that we made, we were in a region where no one had ever had an airplane before. Basically, flight testing in the old days, we didn't have wind tunnel data. We didn't have simulators or computer technology. Today, you have all three, so consequently, you can let the test pilot fly the simulator, so when he flies a new airplane, he's an old hand in the airplane. In the old days, it was trial and error.
On the 14th of October, 1947, Chuck Yeager flew faster than sound.
We realized, even when we started with the X-1, that the so-called sound barrier really restricted us from going any faster. And once we got the X-1 above the speed of sound, then, hey, this opens up the whole universe for us.
A year later in Britain, John Derry took a DH-108 through the sound barrier. Speed still attracted a crowd. The Farnborough Air Show of 1952 was packed to watch Derry fly supersonically in a new de Havilland fighter, the DH-110.
He took off, and we knew he was going to break the sound barrier. And he went up into the sky very high. It disappeared, and then it came back as a very, very small dot, which got larger, and then suddenly there were three. And this part of the engine, I believe it was, suddenly veered to its right and went into the hillside where we had been standing. There was this awful silence, and then there's noise, screams, cries, ambulances, the lot.
John Derry was far from being an irresponsible pilot, but I know the feeling very well that when you are in an air show, there are pressures on you to be competitive with the other pilots. It's the top people in the business being thrown into the gladiatorial ring and all wanting to show off their company's wares to the best of their ability. And it is just possible that John pushed it a fraction more. That is the difference between success and disaster.
Almost immediately afterwards, Neville Duke went up in a plane and broke the sound barrier. That, to me, was a very, very brave thing to do. An amazing man, a unique man, but then they all are.